So I'm Fred Upton, and today we are continuing our tremendous bipartisan efforts on the 21st Century Cures Initiative with this Southwest Michigan roundtable. Launched formally this last spring, the initiative aims to save patients' lives through faster cures and helps employers in states like this great state of Michigan to continue to be a global leader in medical innovation. Today we're going to discuss ideas that we've received over the past number of months, and we look forward to more specific steps that we can take to accelerate the cycle of cures and the role Southwest Michigan's patients, researchers, medical professionals, advocates, and industry play in keeping America the innovation capital of the world. Over the past couple months, the 21st Century Cures Initiative has fostered a robust conversation, and a number of our committee members have held roundtables across the country to hear about how American innovation is providing hope, saving lives, and yes, creating jobs. Today is no exception. It's going to provide an opportunity for us to see how Southwest Michigan can help accelerate the cycle of cures and make a real difference in the lives of every American. Whether it's cutting-edge Parkinson's research happening at the Van Andel Institute, the potential game-changing diabetes treatments under development at Metabolic Solutions, or the breakthroughs that can continue to happen at Pfizer and Stryker, our region of Michigan has proven that it is at the forefront of advances in the life sciences field. I'm excited to welcome my colleague, Vice Chair of the Health Subcommittee from Texas, Dr. Burgess, Dr. Francis Collins, Dr. Shuren from the Food and Drug Administration, and to Southwest Michigan to hear firsthand all the good things that are being done here. And to continue our work towards more cures and treatments, we brought together really yet another all-star roundtable. Join us today, as I said, Dr. Burgess, Dr. Collins, Dr. Shuren, Ms. Kirsten Axelson, the Vice President of Worldwide Policy at Pfizer, Mr. Stephen Bonet, CEO of Metabolic Solutions, Mr. Richard Steck, VP of Global Regulatory Affairs of Perrigo Pharmaceuticals, Dr. Hal Jensen, Founding Dean and Professor at Western Michigan University Homer Stryker Medical School of Medicine, Dr. Peter Jones, Research Director and Chief Scientific Officer of the Van Andel Institute, Mr. Kevin Lobo, Chairman and CEO of Stryker, Mr. Tony Mandarino, Director of the Alex Mandarino Foundation, and Dr. Joe Miro, President, CEO, and Chief Medical Officer at the West Michigan Cancer Center. What we want to do now is to hear from each of you, not a long introduction for sure, or what you're doing. I know we could take up a couple hours doing that, but just a brief description of why you're here, what you think is important, and then we, Mike and I, want to listen, and we'll have, in essence, a conversation really finishing at 12, as Dr. Collins has got other activities across the country as he departs from Southwest Michigan. Dr. Collins, Francis, why don't you start? And make sure that now we're going to be able to broadcast this later, but let's make sure that the mics are closed so that it provide the content that we want.
Great. Well, thank you, Congressman Upton, for organizing this roundtable. I think this is the fourth of these that I've had the chance to take part in, two of them in Washington, one in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and now here in Kalamazoo. As somebody who was a Michigander for 9 years and very much loved being in this state, it's great to be back in Michigan and to be able to talk about something that I think we can all agree to, that we have great opportunities right now in medical research, but we have great needs. Who in this room has not had their life touched either personally or through your family or your friends with illnesses that we currently don't have perfect answers to? Those 7,000 diseases that we know about that affect us. Currently, only 500 of those have treatments that we are confident are actually providing benefit. So we have a ways to go. The good news is we've never been at a more exciting time scientifically than we are right now. As the director of the National Institutes of Health, one of my opportunities to look across the landscape and see what's happening in biomedical research. And if you read my blog every Tuesday and Thursday, and I'm sure you do, you will see these snapshots of things that are happening at a prodigious pace that are truly exhilarating. But again, we need to build upon many of those basic science discoveries to move this ball forward and come up with the devices, the diagnostics, the therapeutics that people are waiting for. And there's no time to waste. So having a roundtable of this sort to talk about how we accelerate the 21st century cures could not be more appropriate. And again, many thanks to Fred and to his colleague Diana DeGette in Colorado, who have organized this bipartisan effort, recognizing that medical illness should not be a political issue. It's an issue for all of us. From my perspective, there are quite a number of things that we could do that would accelerate the process of getting from a good idea to a clinical benefit. And the opportunity to hear from all of you here in Michigan is, I'm sure, going to be of great interest. I would say that from the perspective of the NIH, while we are in Bethesda, Maryland, and as a result of congressional decisions and support by the taxpayers allocate about $30 billion a year to medical research, it goes on all over the country in the finest institutions, including those here in Michigan. $576 million of grant monies went to the state of Michigan in the most recent year, for which we have full numbers. And that has resulted in a lot of really exciting science and breakthroughs that you read about, but they're coming from this support. We are under a stressful situation. There's no question about that. Over the last 10 years, NIH has lost about 23% of its purchasing power for medical research by essentially flat budgets that have been eroded by the effects of inflation. And that means for investigators, this is not an easy time to follow your dream and to pursue that innovative idea. Your chance when you send a grant to NIH, which traditionally has been about 1 in 3, is down now to about 1 in 6. Making this a very difficult time for many laboratories to keep themselves going at the level that we would like to see happen. And we are leaving, as a result of that, some really good science on the table because we can't support it. So all the more reason why we have to be really efficient in the way in which we use those resources, working with other partners in the private sector or with foundations. And I think, as is a major focus of this roundtable, identifying things that are getting in the way of our ability to be efficient with the resources that we have. From NIH's perspective, there's quite a number of those things that will help us, and I've shared a number of them already with Fred and with Dr. Burgess and with others on this committee, such things as trying to figure out ways to make it easier for patients to participate without concerns that their privacy is going to somehow be involved or violated in the process of being part of a clinical trial. Such things as making it easier for scientists to spend their time doing science instead of paperwork, because there's a lot of paperwork right now, and some of it actually isn't all that useful. And some administrative issues that would make it easier for us as the holder of this remarkable trust from the public to get the job done without spending so much time doing things that are perhaps not so productive. And there's quite a long list of those, and maybe in the course of this morning we could touch on some specifics. But I just think it's wonderful that we have this opportunity, that the Congressman is taking the time to listen over these now some 20 or 24 gatherings to many different stakeholders, and I'm sure this morning is going to give us some additional new ideas, and we're all here to listen and to learn. So thank you for the invitation to come to Michigan.
Jeff? Sure.
Well, Mr. Chairman, Dr. Burgess, I want to thank you as well. You had kind of asked why we're here, so beyond the fact that we were invited, for us, patients are at the heart of what we do. I mean, we are about how we improve the health and the quality of life of patients, and the 21st Century Cures Initiative is founded in that, and we share that goal. What I also want to congratulate and thank you for is how you've gone about it. These roundtables are unique in the DC world. DC is usually an adversarial environment. It's sort of the old gladiators from Roman times. But here is really a chance to have dialogue, so truly as business is different in Washington and outside, so thank you. I want to build off of something that Francis had said last night, and I should say, you're also an equal opportunity chairman, so this is my fourth roundtable as well, and I appreciate NIH and FDA getting those same chances. You had said something, a lot of people shook their heads, yes, that even in dire times, when things are tough and you're dealing with an emerging threat, it's so important that you get the data on medical products to know that they work, right? And that's for both drugs, it's vaccines, and it's medical devices, whether they be therapeutics or diagnostics. But what we have to solve is, how do we get that data more quickly and at lower cost? And the other thing we have to do is we have to move away from this mindset that medicine has a lot of knowns, that we have these binary decisions of we do investigation and then we know stuff and we can improve things and they're out there. Well, the truth is, and for the medical students out there, as a former teacher at a medical school, I can tell you medicine is investigational. We're always learning, we're always studying, there's always things we don't know. And if we change that mindset, we realize the question is, when do we know enough to expose more patients to technology? And we can do that as long as we keep learning. So here's some things we need to look at. One of the great inefficiencies in healthcare today is that we generate knowledge all the time, and we don't make good use of it. So as future doctors out there, you're going to sit with your patients, you're going to gather information, and we don't take advantage of it. We could learn so much if we did from those patient encounters. So what we need to do is take advantage of electronic health records. If we do that, we can actually lower the time and cost in clinical trials. We can leverage those encounters and the data capture in electronic health records rather than what we do today in clinical studies. And we build into that into clinical trial networks. We can also reduce time and cost. Now, we can go further. If we're gathering that information, then we know we will have a good understanding of what happens with technologies. Here's a challenge. If I throw a device out there in the world, now I want to study it. People are not incentivized to enroll in a clinical study. It's already approved. But if as part of their routine encounters I get that information, I may not need a clinical study. So the FDA is already putting the pieces in place to have a much more flexible approach for technologies to come to market, where if they're really important, we can accept more uncertainty about them because we'll get some of that data that we'd otherwise get pre-market, post-market. Now imagine a world where we knew we would get that data. We really could shift that model, be far more flexible, still making sure we've got safe and effective devices going to market, but accepting some more uncertainty so we get it to patients faster, but we'll learn. And we think Congress can really help us there in freeing up that data and having a system in place for us to capture it.
Thanks, Jeff. Just pass that to Kevin.
So good morning. My name is Kevin Lobo. I'm the CEO of Stryker. We're based here in Kalamazoo, Michigan. We're about a $9 billion medical device company, very fast growing. And innovation is the lifeblood of our company. So we invest over 6% of our sales in R&D, and we've grown that R&D spend double digits over the last 3 years. So it's a real focus for us. I'm very excited to hear these words. This initiative is fabulous. And frankly, together with AdvaMed, which is the Medical Device Trade Association, we're working together on a breakthrough pathway program, which would hopefully expand the definition of breakthrough technology and really accelerate the adoption. I know FDA already has a number of initiatives underway, and we're partnering with FDA. And then obviously then get that connected to CMS so that these breakthroughs actually get approved and get covered so that patients can be treated. So that's one of the initiatives that were underway. But we're really excited to be part of this and look forward to the rest of the discussion.
Great. Steve?
Well, hopefully this will work. It does, okay. Well,
Just pull it closer. Just,
following a $9 billion company, we're about a $9 company. but I think that actually is a pretty good juxtaposition of life science innovation in the state of Michigan. So first of all, thank you for having me as a participant on the panel this morning. I'm looking forward to it. My name is Steve Benoit. I'm the CEO of Metabolic Solutions Development Company, based here in Kalamazoo, in fact, just about 2 blocks from here. Metabolic Solutions was founded in 2006 by a couple of researchers who had started their careers out at the Upton company in the 1980s. They had a simple vision that was that diabetes could and should be prevented. There we go. And really, as a result of that vision, we've been able to
Right, there's a little feedback.
solve the feedback problems of the world. Well, I think what was interesting about it, though, is while it was a quest that started out to understand how drugs to treat diabetes work, it turned out that it resulted in a discovery of a new drug target, of a new mechanism of action for drugs, and not only that was relevant in diabetes, but also neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, non-alcoholic fatty liver and NASH and polycystic kidney disease, and a number of other diseases that are associated with metabolic dysfunction. And that's a great example of how innovation starts. It really was a germ and has really grown into, I think, quite an opportunity going forward. I think from a company standpoint, we also represent Michigan's response to consolidation within the life sciences industry over the last decade. We've, as a company, have raised about $65 million over the last 8 years, almost entirely from sources in West Michigan, as well as the State of Michigan Strategic Fund. And so Open Life Sciences up in Grand Rapids and Southwest Michigan Life Science Venture Fund here in Kalamazoo are two of our largest shareholders and really have driven our ability to make the scientific advances that we've had. Our scientists are housed in the Southwest Michigan First Innovation Center, and that's really a pretty unique facility that was a result of a public-private partnership to support life science companies like ours. And then we actually work through a whole network of contract research organizations, many of whom all used to work at the Upton company or Pharmacy and Pfizer, but now have maybe their own medicinal chemistry CRO like Colexin, or they have clinical supply services like Team Pharma, and then of course MPI Research just down the road. So it's a pretty unique group like that. But just finally, and I think apropos to the conversation that we'll be having here over the next couple of hours, little companies like us, as when we are at $9, you have to raise a lot of money, and you have to continually raise a lot of money, and that's pretty much what a CEO in a life science startup does, is they raise money all day long. And yet, I think you have access to capital now constrained by some of the current elements of the regulatory framework that I think very unintentionally, though, have dramatically increased the cost of drug development. When you look at what it cost to develop a diabetes drug maybe a decade or two ago, it was, $50 or $100 million. Well, now it's well over $500 million. And that has the consequence of squeezing out innovators and small companies and driving up the cost of drug development. But I think more importantly, it has the impact of restricting the number of new treatments that you ultimately will get out to patients. And clearly that's not the aim of the regulatory environment, but I think it's a consequence of some of the changes that have happened over the last decade. And so that's why I'm really looking forward to the conversation this morning and how we can make some changes that I think you call it legislation that keeps up with innovation. And I think that would be a good goal. So thank you.
Thanks,
Hello, I'm Tony Mandarino. I'd like to thank Congressman Upton for the invite. I was basically drug into the medical world unwillingly through my firstborn son got cancer a month before his third birthday, neuroblastoma, and as a result, have met a lot of families going through similar situations as us. And my wife and I started a little foundation, little grassroots foundation, the Alex Mandarino Foundation. We lost Alex in July 2013, so obviously there's a big drive here for me. Selfishly, I'm curious to hear a lot about the Creating Hope Act today and the Carolyn Price Walker Act. And again, appreciate the invite, and looking forward to the event today.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me, Congressman Upton, Representative Burgess. I'll refer to you as Doctor Burgess. It's a delight to be here and sit around the table with esteemed colleagues. They put me next to Mr. Mandarino because by training I'm a pediatric oncologist. And I started my career actually as an NIH-funded investigator, Dr. Collins, and I realized how hard it is to maintain that funding track. And I think right now I represent, if you will, the sharp edge that touches the patient. And that's what we're all here for today, really to look at what we can do for patients. So there are a couple of things I'd like to hear this committee address. Number one, I'd like to pick up a little bit on what Dr. Shuren said with respect to electronic health records. Okay? Currently, electronic health records sit in every physician's office. They are a documentation tool. They are not a decision support tool, and they're siloed. They don't talk to each other. That prevents the continuity of care we were promised with them 20 years ago. Somehow Congress should address that issue, or at least have another roundtable about it. The second issue with the EHR, okay, is that it really can't be updated. Dr. Collins, if I should pay for my DNA sequencing and my genome sequencing to be done, it will come to me as a printout, which I will have to scan into a medical record, and it'll be a discrete data element. How is my physician going to be able to pull that out? More importantly, there's going to be 20,000 variants of unknown significance, right? And so how then do we know what to do with them? And when one of those variants comes to be associated with the development of Alzheimer's, how does that information get to me, get to my medical record, or get to my physician? It doesn't. More importantly, if I haven't developed my Alzheimer's yet, okay, which may be coming in a year, I don't know, but if I haven't developed it yet, how do I get the feedback from my medical record back to the drug company and the research organization so that they can enroll me in a clinical trial? That interface isn't there. Okay, and that's an area, and I realize HIPAA is important, but that's an area many of us would sign up immediately for and welcome opening up our medical records so it could be accessed and we would be eligible for trials. So I think that's one of the areas that Congress could help. I think the second area is the cost of drug development. As we know, cancer is now extremely expensive to treat. If you listen to the news or 60 Minutes, everybody's heard the latest events about the cost of new drugs. And certainly drug companies ought to be reimbursed for the cost of development. But that should be a fair cost. And somehow we also have to support generic drug development because the shortages really impact the treatment. I think when you have a patient on treatment for neuroblastoma, if you can't get one of the standard agents because the generic is not available, that's something no parent or no patient should suffer. So I'd like to have a little discussion about how Congress could help us with supporting cost of generics and potentially discussing the cost of new drug development and cost of new treatments. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Chairman Upton, for the invite to participate. My name is Richard Steck. I am here to represent Perrigo Company. I have responsibility for the regulatory affairs function, so I am quite familiar both with Perrigo and past positions I've held with getting drugs through FDA and the process. And I would like to thank Dr. Miro in part for the softball of offering up the discussion of generic drugs. The 21st Century Cures Initiative talks about the process from discovery, development to delivery. And I like to think that the option that generic drugs provides is part of that process, perhaps on the back end of that process, but a very important part of that process because it does two things. It makes affordable health care a reality for the consumer, and it takes some of the burden, not all, but some of the burden out of the payer system, both at the state and federal level. And I think we're fortunate to be discussing this topic on about the 30-year anniversary of Hatch-Waxman Act. I believe, our company believes, and many of my colleagues in the industry firmly believe that the act, the success of the act has both fostered innovation from the brand level by creating robust competition in the generic arena, as well as making access to affordable health care a greater reality. If I can take for maybe just as an example, you take the disease state of multiple sclerosis. There are 9 approved FDA medications for the treatment. Unfortunately, there's no cures for multiple sclerosis. There's only treatments at this stage. And all of those products are roughly about a $60,000 a year regimen. Now, MS is typically diagnosed in patients anywhere from age 20 to 40. And if you're fortunate with that disease to say live on to the ripe old age of 80, your cost without any generic competition in the marketplace would be an excess of $10 million a year. So that burden is being absorbed both by the consumer and by the payer system in the absence of generic competition. Now, as it stands today, one of the drugs, Copaxone, has generic competition knocking on the door. Generic drugs for just again another rule of thumb benchmarking, when a first generic enters the marketplace, the rule of thumb we look at is that the cost of therapy lowers by roughly 50%. When 4 to 5 generic drugs enter the marketplace, the cost of therapy drops by about 90%. So in the case for Copaxone, at the point where there's robust generic competition, you're looking at therapy going from $60,000 a year to less than $1,000 a year. And I think whether you're in the payer system or on the patient system, all would welcome that benefit. And I think you can also look at the benefit of generic competition. Most recently, I've been following the race for cures for hepatitis C. There's 2 approved and 3 waiting in the wings, AbbVie, Merck, and I think maybe Pfizer has the other one. Now, those therapies, I think this is just, it's breathtaking, it's heartwarming that you can actually have a cure for hepatitis C, but the cost for that ranges anywhere from about $70,000 to $150,000. That's a lot of money to absorb. But if you look at the balance in the payer system, the more we can take cost out of more mature therapies, the more dollars there are available for new and emerging therapies. So some thoughts I'd like to leave at this stage with the panel is that we should consider the successes of Hatch-Waxman as we think forward about how we incentivize new therapies for breakthrough cures, or if we can only get to the treatment stage while we work on therapies moving forward. And lastly, I've worked on both sides, both brand and generic, so there is a tough balance in terms of intellectual property and rewarding the ability to market independently to recoup your development costs, yet not create an endless monopoly in the marketplace. And that's a tough decision no matter which side of the aisle you're on. And I think we need to think prudently and strike a fair balance should any future legislation go down that path.
Thank you, and thank you, Chairman Upton, for having us here, and Dr. Burgess and Congresswoman DeGette for your leadership for convening all of us in the public-private sector to come in and offer up solutions and ideas. I'm a 2-time veteran to a roundtable, and it's particularly poignant today that we're in Michigan for Pfizer. Pfizer's largest manufacturing site is in Michigan. Zoetis, formerly part of Pfizer Animal Health, is right across the street, employing 700 people. We have a long history in Michigan, and also have really seen how Michigan's leadership in developing the biotech sector, investing over $1 billion in 1999, how it's paid dividends and attracting jobs, 42,000 people employed in the biotech sector in Michigan today due to that effort. It's tremendous. And what's exciting about this group is what what you're setting out to do and really how attainable it is. When we think about the challenges that are facing society now, we have our economic crisis, our wars, but changing the course of disease is something we know we can do because we've seen it done. We've seen diseases eradicated here and around the world. And we've seen treatment extending lives and extending lives affordably. To your point about generics, we look at what is available now to treat cardiovascular disease. There are 13 million people on generic Lipitor. That's a medicine that's saving lives for a very small amount of money. And we're going to see the same thing happen for cancer, for rheumatoid arthritis, for all the other diseases. And that's part of the cycle of innovation and cost containment that will allow us not only to extend our health, but also do it in a way that's financially sustainable. And we're also all here today because we are all going to be patients, right? We're all going to be patients. Many of us are caregivers right now. My husband was paralyzed 17 years ago. He received an old medicine called Solumedrol. It's a Pfizer medicine, and it's mainly been grit that has taken him on to become a White House fellow, lead businesses. If he were paralyzed again today, he would get Solumedrol and probably a healthy dose of grit to carry on. We can do better than that. We can do better than that for the many diseases, chronic and acute, that are facing people today. We can develop more medicines and get them to patients faster. And part of what's important for companies like Pfizer is having a predictable environment within to develop our medicines. We're working on fixing our innovative engine, and a lot of that comes through partnership with the NIH, through NCATS, through the Accelerating Medicines Partnership. And part of that comes with having a predictable amount of time when you know your medicines are going to be on the market and available to patients, and then also knowing that you're going to see these massive cost declines that are going to take the pressure off the healthcare system and free up money for innovation. And part of that comes from having a reimbursement environment that is an environment that steers patients towards good decisions both in terms of the cost and the effectiveness of their treatments, looking across the spectrum. Is it more cost effective to take a vaccination to avoid a disease? Is it more cost effective to take a medicine and stay at home and stay out of the hospital? Or is it more cost effective to change your behavior and avoid getting sick entirely? Those are the kinds of things we can do through partnerships like this, and through effective use of data, and through really bringing all of us together to come up with solutions. And to the emerging group of doctors in the room, I want to thank all of you for being stewards of this hope that we will have more options in the future, 10 and 20 years from now, to treat the diseases that are still untreatable.
Well, it's a real honor to be asked here. Thank you. I'm new to Michigan. I arrived in February from the University of Southern California, where I've been for the past 35 years. I've been funded by an R01 grant from the National Institutes of Health for almost 40 years. So I have some feeling about research. Now, I came to the Van Andel Institute as the research director with a couple of specific goals in mind. The first was to take the resources at the Van Andel Institute and create a world-famous hub for epigenetic research, which is what I happen to do. Epigenetics is a burgeoning field of science, and the basic science is now at a stage where I think we can begin to translate that much more effectively into improving the lives of patients. We're too small to do that ourselves, so what have we done? We're actually partnering with other organizations to take the fruits of our labor and get it out into the patient arena. 2 weeks ago, we hosted 350 people on a symposium for Parkinson's disease, which included many people with Parkinson's in the audience, caregivers, scientists, and so on. And the Van Andel Institute has invested $500,000 a year together with the Cure Parkinson's Trust, which is a group of people from all over the world that meets every year in Grand Rapids to try and reposition existing medicines to treat Parkinson's disease. Incredibly expensive to develop new medicines for diseases like Parkinson's. So are there medicines out there which we can use better by putting them in different combinations? Now, we're also very interested in cancer research, and how have we done that? How are we moving outside of our own Grand Rapids environment? Well, Stephen Balin, who's at Johns Hopkins, and I were fortunate enough to be co-leaders of an epigenetics dream team. It's not my name, that's what they call it, and funded by Stand Up to Cancer, which you might have seen. There was a telethon very recently to raise money for research. And so we've actually, the Van Andel Institute is now going to invest money in our team to continue its performance. And we hosted a meeting on Friday with 5 major academic institutions which are capable of doing clinical trials, 4 of them in the United States, all name brand places, and the University of Copenhagen, so that we can continue this work. And the number one driving force is patients, patients, patients. How can we get the drugs in which we're interested, these new epigenetic drugs, into the clinic? So we're very excited with this partnership, and you saw the telethon, and I want to say, I have been up there in Hollywood. You know, I come from Hollywood, right? I've been there for some time. And at one of the functions, which was a telethon, you know, I might say to you, well, you know, I was on stage with Chris Christopherson. And I have to tell you, I was on stage with our Francis Collins playing the guitar. Now, I can't play the guitar, but I was there at a telethon, so I know that he thinks very favorably about Stand Up to Cancer. Let me briefly end my remarks about the issue with the NIH funding. As you know, this is the largest amount of money that's spent on research in the world. But I have to tell you that out in the trenches, there is naked fear. It is the only way I can describe it. I have one of the best graduate students I've ever trained, who is on the job market looking for what's called a postdoctoral fellowship to continue her training. She's been to 6 major labs in this country. No one will offer her a job because no one knows whether they're going to get the next grant. And so that, I think, is something we need to think about. You know, you were talking about continuity. How do we get continuity? Well, how do you expect young people to go into scientific research if they don't know, you know, what's going to happen 5 years from now? You know, what is going to happen? I have been around, as I said, quite a long time, and I've never seen it like that, not that fear. I'd love to employ you, but I'm not sure. Can you wait until I hear about how my grant did? So anyway, I'm thrilled to be here in Michigan, and I'm really honored to be invited here. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Hal Jensen. I'm the founding dean of Western Michigan University Homer Stryker MD School of Medicine. And Congressman Upton, Fred, Congressman Burgess, Dr. Burgess, welcome, and welcome to all of you to the home of the medical school and to Kalamazoo. This building has a great legacy, even though we're a new medical school. This building is a former Upton building. A lot of drugs were discovered within the walls of this building, and a lot of the treatments that we offer to patients had some roots in this building. This land was actually part of the parcel of land that Dr. Upton first purchased when he moved his company to Kalamazoo. So there's a great legacy that the medical school has, that Kalamazoo has, in drug discovery, innovation, and we also are proud to have the name of Homer Stryker as part of our medical school, another great clinician, great physician, great educator, and great entrepreneur that really made a difference in patients' lives. And when you look at both Dr. Stryker and Dr. Upton, the thing that they really shared, even though one was focused on drug development, one was focused on device development, they shared that passion for making the lives of their patients better, to solve problems for their patients. And I think that's really what the medical school is about as well. We're here to provide outstanding care for today's patients, to train physicians for tomorrow, the next generations of patients, and to engage in discovery that will benefit all generations of patients. And that's really the focus of the medical school. And creating a new medical school here in Kalamazoo has been an interesting journey. We're just really starting with our first year of medical students this year. But creating that environment of discovery and that culture of scholarship as part of the medical school from scratch has been an interesting journey, and we are starting to encounter some of those same issues that affect medicine across the country. Some have been alluded to in the discussion, the statements already. We're seeing, as we bring together, for example, the clinical research at our two major teaching hospitals at Borgess and Bronson, as we work to bring that together to be more effective, we run into the same problems that I think occur nationally in how do we get more patients into clinical studies? How do we learn from these patients? I would claim that every patient encounter is an experience. I would claim in a good way that every patient experience is an experiment. you're looking to see, did the intervention I provide as a physician make a difference to make that life of that patient better? And as a lifelong learner, as a physician, I'm going to learn from my experiences, but we should be learning in a broader sense about all of those experiences. And we have thousands, if not millions, of encounters a day, and we're not learning from those as a society. And as we work to learn and bring that information so that it can advance science faster, we run into the obstacles of informed consent, and how do patients get enrolled and engaged in trials that can advance medicine and bring discoveries and treatments to patients across the country and across the world. So we run into those obstacles, and I think that there are some opportunities there as we go forward to make things more effective and more efficient. And as Peter alluded to in your Hollywood accent, is that there are some major obstacles going forward as we train the next generation of researchers. I think that there's should be a lot of optimism for the future. At the same time, when we have bright young people look at the future of medical research and they see the pressures that our current faculty and current researchers encounter, when they see that the average age of the first independent R01 is around 41 years of age, when they see funding cycles that are at some study sections down 6-7%, when they see those kinds of realities, it could be discouraging. And I think we do discourage some of the best and the brightest from going into that area of research. How many other Homer Strykers are out there? How many other W.E. Upjohns are out there that are not going to get the opportunity? So in building a new medical school, we want to create that culture of discovery, but we also want to work to develop the opportunities for people to be successful and to bring those ideas. This medical school really is about innovation, and it is built on that legacy of innovation. And we want to see that continue both in Kalamazoo for patients that are here, but also for patients across the country.
Well, thank you, Fred, for letting me be here. I particularly want to acknowledge the participation of the medical school class. 40 years ago this past summer, I started on the very journey that you are starting on now. And I will tell you, as we sit here around the table and talk about things, the discoveries that are just around the corner, they're going to impact your lives in ways that right now you can't even know. Those things are truly phenomenal. When I was a resident at Parkland Hospital, we didn't know what hepatitis C was. I thought it was a lab error. They called it non-A, non-B hepatitis. What the heck? You can't make up your mind? And now there's a treatment for it. And really, just within my professional lifetime, that has occurred. That's pretty phenomenal. Now we have the luxury of arguing, does it cost too much? Well, great. That's a wonderful argument to have. I'd much rather have that argument than how many people are we going to lose from hepatitis C down the road. And there's other examples as well. I was speaking to a group of doctors at Baylor College or Baylor Hospital in Dallas the other day, and I frequently use the fact that when I was in medical school, Dr. Fortran came and talked to us about medicine now known as Tagamet, cimetidine, a type of histamine blocker. When I was in medical school, the surgery schedule was full of people having highly selective vagotomies and partial gastrectomies because of peptic ulcer disease. You don't see that operation posted any longer because everyone can go to the store and buy the little purple pill over the counter pretty cheaply. And even though we haven't improved our diets and we haven't improved a lot of things that we perhaps should as a society, we now have a proton pump inhibitor basically available to the masses that prevents this from happening. These are the kind of breakthroughs you are going to see. I tried to think, Fred, when I was in medical school, when our members of Congress came and talked to us, and either my memory's poor or it never happened. I think it never happened, and I just want to really underscore for the medical students, this is unusual to have members of Congress, heads of federal agencies, people from the private sector, people from the investment side, people from the research side, all gathered together in one place, and this has happened time and time again. Why in the world would I come here from Fort Worth, Texas, where it's right now 95 degrees and very pleasant? Why in the world would I come here? because the changes that are going to occur as a result of this activity, I mean, yes, we'll all have overpasses in our district. We'll all have particular votes we've taken, but this is the legacy for not just this Congress, but the next Congress, because that's really where the legislation is going to come. This is our legacy piece. This is our gift to you. You are going to have tools at your disposal to alleviate human suffering that no generation of doctors has ever known or could even ever have thought of. And this is the type of activity that will facilitate it and get it into your hands faster and in a way that's perhaps less obtrusive than previous go-rounds. So I want to thank everyone for allowing me to be here and participation. Certainly want to tip my hat to the medical students who are here. Let my experience be a cautionary tale. Don't stray too far from medicine. But thank you, Fred, for letting me be here.
Well, great. Appreciate everyone's opening comments. Now we really want to have a discussion. And again, particularly for Mike and me, we're good listeners. Just for those in the audience, just to know what our timetable is, we've had about 24 of these. A number of them in D.C., literally a round table, not behind the dais for the, just swear to tell the truth type hearings that you might see, but real discussions. I want to say that we've probably been in 8 or 10 states like this one, like Michigan, with this roundtable, different participants, different perspectives for sure. Our goal is to continue. We'll probably have one more of these formal settings in D.C. In the lame duck session when Congress returns. We're actually going to have a hearing next week that Mike will be able to be there for.
Call it extra innings, not lame.
All right, extra innings. All right. Well, it'll be but it'll. All right. We're going to have a hearing next week in our committee on Ebola that Dr. Burgess will be able to participate in. But in November, how's that? November, I think we're going to have a sort of a final hearing in terms of looking what we have. I couldn't do this. Clearly, I couldn't do this on my own. Anyone that knows me for sure, my wife is in the audience. But our goal with the talented staff that we have, some of them are here, some of them more are coming this week as well. But we're intending to actually write a bill. As we know in Congress, you've got to get everything scored by the Congressional Budget Office. How much is it going to cost? We're going to get it scored. Our plan is to introduce it early next year, January. We're going to be working with all the disease groups, diabetes, cancer, name them, to help us with our colleagues. And this is a bipartisan effort. Diana DeGette's a very able colleague of mine. We're really partners on this for sure. Get it introduced, move it through the process. That means we mark it up, get that done in our committee, the Energy and Commerce Committee, before Easter. On the House floor before Memorial Day. It's pretty rapid pace. Work with the Senate. We're already identifying Republicans and Democrats there that want to help us move identical legislation or pretty close to it, and actually get it to the president for his signature before the end of next year. And it's going to be a remarkable process. I mean, as you talk, Peter, about naked fear, as I look back at my career, one of the best things that I've ever done was to help lead the bipartisan effort to double the money for the NIH, which we did back in the 90s. We're at $30 billion. We were once at 12. And one of the things that we've heard quite a bit is the certainty of the dollars. What happens with sequestration? What happens when you rely on the appropriators to try and fit their numbers in? And I think that it is very important that our institutions, the NIH, the administration, and that we all be on board and really know what that financial track is going to be. On the surface of things, $600 million sounds like a lot of money. It is. But think of all the research that doesn't take place because the money's not available. And think of the reverse. If we don't solve Alzheimer's, I mean, it is a $1 trillion disease for care as the baby boomers age. So let's get into a little discussion and some questions back and forth between the folks that are here. Yeah.
So I really appreciate what you just said about the importance of stability in the support for medical research. The doubling was a great thing, Fred, and what you and others made happen there provided an enormous boost of enthusiasm and opportunity and innovation, and lots of scientists had the opportunity to push efforts forward in ways that just wouldn't have happened. I was leading the Human Genome Project at that point, and it was possible with that kind of infusion of additional resources to recruit some additional really bright folks to come and join us and to finish that project 2 years early and actually under the original estimated cost for the whole thing. So it makes so much sense in this climate to make those investments. And economically, every economist that does the analysis gets a slightly different answer, but they would all agree that every dollar that goes into NIH research returns at least twofold just in that first year in terms of economic goods and services to the local community. So even if you didn't care about health, if you were just trying to boost the economy, and goodness knows we all care about that, this would be a great way to do it. What has really been tough, though, is that since that doubling came to an end in 2003, the gradual slippage in the support has eroded a lot of that momentum. Recent surveys suggesting as many as 18% of working scientists are now thinking about moving to another country because the support in other places is better than this. I have the privilege of serving as the chair of a group called the Heads of International Research Organizations. It's CEOs only, and it's the funding agencies for public support of biomedical research around the world. When we get together, about 15 of us around the table, 95% of the dollars that are going for biomedical research in the public sector are represented. So China and India and Brazil and South Korea and Singapore and European countries and Canada are all there. And we go around the table and everybody talks about what their trajectory is for supportive research. And China's going to go up by 22% next year, and India is talking about 11, and Singapore is on this very steep climb, and South Korea is coming up fast, and Brazil, oh my goodness, if you've been to Brazil, you can see what's happening there as well. And then they come to me, and I have to say, well, you know, if we're lucky, we won't lose more than 5% of our purchasing power this year, because of course we did lose that with the sequester. And they just look at me like, what in the world has happened to the United States of America, which had such a prominent leadership role? Now, I don't mean to scare all of the students here, because I believe we're going to turn this around. And by the time it is your moment to plunge into medical research, which I hope a lot of you will want to do, we'll figure out how to get this back on a stable course. But the urgency of doing so, I think, is sort of the most prominent concern on the minds of those who are trying to make these breakthroughs right now. One concrete thing I would mention, I don't think I brought this up with you before, Fred, just in terms of a flexibility that would help us at NIH. Right now, we get our budget every year from the appropriators. And frankly, we don't get it on October 1st. We get a continuing resolution just like we did this year. And then maybe there's actually a decision made about the appropriation by December, but sometimes it's not until March. But then we have to spend every dime of whatever we get by September 30th. There's no opportunity to carry funds over. That puts us in a position of having to do things that are really sort of irrational because of the inflexibility. Other departments, like Department of Energy, have multi-year funding where they're allowed to carry dollars over. If we just had 2-year funding instead of 1-year funding, it would make a huge difference in our ability to use the funds wisely. And that doesn't cost any money, and I think that's something that might fit into your plans as far as what to do with 21st century cures. Just one idea to put on the table.
That's a good one.
I'll echo, we'd love to have that at the FDA. So, you know, we want at least stable funding, but we want the opportunity to go beyond a single year. Because given some of the barriers we have to even spend the money, you can come to the end of the year and suddenly you have to, if you will, get rid of money. And it doesn't allow you to manage your budget wisely. The other is, I'd love to be able to spend my money better on my people. So today, I am limited in what I can pay my people. It makes it so much harder to recruit and retain the brightest. So I have great people from industry. They would come, but I say, here's all I can pay. And I said, we can't come for that. Or I have people and they get skilled, they get trained at the FDA, then they go, well, I'm going to go back and work for Kevin, which can be a good thing, but you know, they're going to go out there and make a different kind of salary. And so I lose those good people, and we all worry about consistency approach. Well, it's hard to be consistent if the people keep changing. So some way to figure that out, and I don't even know if this is solvable. I have good people who they're at the end of their careers in, let's say, industry. They're smart. They could bring so much to us. Then they are, well, I have retirement funds. They may be in stocks and other things. I have to give it up if I come to the FDA. That means I give up my retirement. And that also is a barrier for us for getting people. So this is also about how can we better smartly use the dollars we have, even if the dollars stay the same, because we could use a lot of help.
If I could just interject, on the receiving end of the funding, in other words, the investigator, this has major implications as well. You know, as I was talking about my student who's looking for this postdoc and nobody will hire her, possibly because they don't know what's going to happen with this kind of sequestration and this kind of delay, it doesn't make any sense at all, because it creates it's not only a problem to actually use the money, but it's also a problem to receive the money and to then use it.
Just to comment quickly, I've always been a supporter of a 2-year budget. I think we need to do it as a Congress. There are some years that one body doesn't even pass a budget, like 4 years in a row. But it would make a lot of sense. Actually, what we did last year, the Ryan Murray budget, was a 2-year budget, so it finished up both 14 and 15. And there's already been a commitment by our leadership saying we're going to, regardless of what happens in the election, we're going to keep those budget numbers the same. They're not going to change. But I think that would be a very important tool, and I think that we can perhaps work to make sure that there's carryover funds. It seemed like would make a lot of sense, and you know, when you pass a law, it becomes the law. So it's you know, we'll work on getting that done. I think that's a very valuable addition to how we write this. So, yeah, Kirsten.
Just to continue on with this theme of stability and predictability, you know, Pfizer invested around $7 billion in research last year, but too often that research and where the investment is made is based on the decisions of patent attorneys rather than the best science. And that is in the small molecules area because of the relatively short period of regulatory exclusivity and the fact that patent challenges are coming earlier and earlier in the life cycle. And one way to create really an open playing field where scientists are making the decisions about where these investments are happening would be to consider doing what has happened in Europe, which is aligning small and large molecule regulatory exclusivity. That would mean the investment goes in the place that would likely have the best outcome for patients. We know that payers are very carefully scrutinizing what is being used and controlling what's being used and controlling the cost. And furthermore, it would create an environment where we would see more cost savings down the road because you would see very likely more investment in small molecules. And we know that there's more cost savings when a small molecule goes generic than when a large molecule goes generic. And I know many things have been considered. It would also open up the opportunity for more partnerships because you could really invest in older therapies, looking for new uses of them, and not be as concerned about where you are in the patent life. And for medicine that's slow progressing, requires a long trial, we're deterred from doing that trial. You're really encouraged to do the fastest, quickest trial. We want the best trial with the best evidence that can be scrutinized by doctors, by payers, by patients, and really analyzed, is it bringing the value to people that they want?
Steve.
I'd just like to build on that because I think extending the patent protection for compounds that maybe the original composition of matter patents have lapsed, but the compound never was never marketed in any way, shape, or form in the clinic, would make a big difference. And in fact, that's one of the barriers that our company has had to overcome, was that short duration of Hatch-Waxman protection for a compound that we know works to treat diabetes. And yet, because of that short period of regulatory exclusivity and therefore profits in the marketplace, you can't get investors to invest behind all of that. And so I think that's a really simple change that I think would really have dramatic effect. And if I could just
Mr.
build.
Benoit, you say
Yes.
that's a simple change, but until the end of this year, Mr. Waxman is still on our committee, and his name is part of the act. He has a lot of territorial imperative there.
We could enter into a license arrangement for continuing use of his name rights after he moves on. Fair point. But I think it's a clearly defined step that could take, that I think would have dramatic benefit for patients. It would have dramatic benefit for innovators, and I think it would open up access for smaller companies in particular to the capital that they need to get a product like that out in the market. Because that same compound, interestingly enough, goes right to what Dr. Jones was talking about. That same compound is being, because we couldn't get it financed to move into to be moved into diabetes, is now being repositioned in partnership with the Van Andel Institute for Parkinson's. And we're working with Patrick Brundon on maybe being able to reverse dyskinesia, and then also demonstrating whether the compound works as a neuroprotection agent. And I think it kind of comes full circle, because now that same compound, which originally was a diabetes drug, but because you didn't have enough patent protection, you couldn't get it into the marketplace and get it financed, we repurpose it for Parkinson's. And then through the NeuroNext initiative, that compound is starting to then focus on supporting phase 2 clinical development in a therapeutic area that just can't attract the kind of investment from venture capitalists, because the regulatory pathways are uncertain, the cost is enormous, and you just don't know how long it's going to take to actually move through the evaluation of that compound. So here, for a relatively small amount of money, in a very defined specific study, you can take a compound that you know is safe in people so far, that you can see if it helps a disease that has no treatments. And the government is now filling a role in funding phase 2 clinical development to see whether this compound has the merit to move forward from a safety and efficacy standpoint. And then that can be a catalyst for attracting more funding and moving the compound eventually for the benefit of patients.
Just to add to that, I think this is maybe a really important theme that several of us have attached ourselves to, and Peter Jones mentioned this already, is this opportunity to repurpose compounds that were originally developed for some other purpose. The scientific facts are such that as we learn more and more about the molecular pathways that are involved in diseases, whether it's cancer or diabetes or autism or schizophrenia, we're beginning to discover that these pathways are not like independent entities with no overlap. And as you see that kind of picture emerging, you realize that, oh my gosh, this drug that was developed for disease A, and where we know exactly what target it hits, and actually didn't work that well for disease A, might be just the thing for disease B. But unfortunately, the patent is now close to expired, or maybe completely expired. So how do we provide an incentive for that kind of repurposing? We put together a program and invited companies to make available compounds that were sitting in their freezers and that had failed in phase 2 or 3 trials on the grounds of efficacy. They were safe, but they didn't happen to work for the disease for which they were tested, and invited those companies to make those available for crowdsourcing new ideas about, okay, maybe this drug could actually work in a totally different way for a different disease. And 8 companies agreed to sign on to that. There was a lot of conversation about intellectual property, as you can imagine, but we came up with a template that everybody was comfortable with. 58 compounds were made available. Every single one of those compounds had at least somebody out there in a small business or in an academic institution that had an idea about a new use for that drug. And we went through a very rigorous competition, and there are 9 of those that are now in phase 2 trials. And again, you go straight to a phase 2 trial because you already know all that preclinical stuff's been done. I don't know whether those are going to work or not, but I know we would have had a lot more than 58 compounds if there had not been this concern about whether the IP was already pretty well gone. And I'm a little worried that maybe we'll get some home runs in those 9 that we test just at the point where it becomes unfeasible to do the phase 3 trial because there's no more financial incentive. Use patents are in there somewhere, but the people I talk to, and believe me, I'm not a lawyer, are not convinced that those are going to be an answer in terms of preventing some kind of other unfair competition for a company that might put then $100 million into running the phase 3 trial and then discover they have really no special access to the market. It seems like it ought to be a solvable problem, but I've learned over the course of 20 years at NIH that anything that involves patents is not necessarily an easy one, because as soon as you open up the patent law, all kinds of things start happening that maybe are going to be unintended consequences. I don't know, Mr. Chairman, whether this is an issue that fits somehow underneath this umbrella of what you're trying to accomplish, but it does keep coming up, and it's interesting it came up from actually now 4 of us here at this table this morning.
Just to add a follow-on comment to that, the biosimilar legislation, I think, went a long way to try to get this issue right, with extending the exclusivity period to recoup costs, yet put the brakes on for using that as a lever for a life cycle follow-on strategy that could extend a product for 10, 20 years. From our company's perspective, we look at mature molecules, maybe not for life-saving medicines, but I agree with the comments from Steve Benoit and others that the 3 years that you get of exclusivity is just not enough to recoup the cost, and quick follow-on products are right on your heels. So that is, for mature, well-known compounds, that is a disadvantage from taking those forward. I agree.
So just shifting a little bit to devices, I think for us, I talked a lot about our R&D investment that we do internally, but frankly, the biggest part of our R&D tends to be companies that we acquire. So they're the companies, the small startups, and you know, my biggest concern and what I applaud is that we're looking from basic science all the way through to post-market surveillance, but having a thriving startup community is really important, and where they know that there's predictability, where they can take their products. For example, stroke is an area that we're looking at a lot of mechanical treatments. So there may be drug solutions, but there are also mechanical solutions that we're developing internally, but there are many startup companies, and today we're buying most of our companies in the United States, and that's where most of the startup money has been, that's where the startup investments have been, and frankly, I think one of the big outcomes for this would be to make sure that we continue to have a very thriving environment for startups, and we're starting to see that money start to dry up. There's the unpredictability that worries a lot of the venture capitalists, and certainly you know this more than I do, but that's for us a hunting ground for innovation. And then what we do at Stryker is once we find those solutions, we can scale it up and bring it to so many more people, and that's really what we're more of a perfecters of technologies than we are inventors, but without the invention, we can't then scale it to the masses. So I really applaud the looking at it sort of from tip to tip and trying to take out the uncertainty. Outcomes are always uncertain, but if the process is more predictable, that takes away the concerns for investors to say, okay, I'll take a risk, but at least I know when in the process my money will either cash out or that the product won't work. And that type of risk they're willing to take. The other types of risks that are more of the unknown risks around process, those are the ones that scare them off.
So one of the things that we learned through our roundtables is that we've lost about half the venture capitalists that 10 years were in the marketplace. They've chosen to go someplace else. The other thing is that we know particularly impacts you, Kevin, is the medical device tax. So it's terrific that Stryker has continued to make a real priority for R&D. But when you have a medical device tax that hits you very hard, where it forces you to lay off 1,000 folks to be able to pay for that, there is a bipartisan proposal to repeal that, and I'd like to think that we're going to be able to get that done at some point in the next number of months. You want to comment on that?
Well, certainly that would be very welcome, because it's a tax on sales. So that's really difficult. If you're a startup company and you're not yet profitable, but you have to pay tax on sales, it's not a tax on income, that's really prohibitive. And certainly it's the government's trying to figure out the funding, but it's really sort of an arbitrary tax that's being used obviously for overall needs, but frankly is, if I look at our company, we're spending $100 million on that tax. It's about 20% of our R&D budget. So it's a very, very significant burden, and we have to find the money somewhere else. So we're obviously working very hard to be productive as we can, but it requires us to actually cancel some programs internally. But more importantly is the impact on the small companies that aren't even profitable and yet having to pay that tax.
Other thoughts, questions?
I wanted to go back to a point that Dr. Miro brought up about the privacy issues and HIPAA. Interest of full disclosure, I signed up with 23andMe some months ago. It was a bargain. And I'm perfectly happy to share with them through these, what I at first thought were pointless and intrusive surveys, but now I find that I'm catching myself doing one on the airplane going back and forth to Washington, and get the better understanding that here is an industry that is growing the information base in ways that I really cannot understand, but they obviously do. And I'm perfectly willing to part with that information in what I guess is a free-flowing environment. Now contrast that with the other day, I was being interviewed on CNN, and they started needling me about releasing the name of the Ebola patient in Dallas. Obviously, that's in violation of federal law. Would not recommend that the hospital do that, or they'll create all kinds of problems for themselves. But the interviewer was pretty persistent. This is information that could be helpful in the public health analysis of what's going on, and I didn't disagree with that. So fortunately for me, a government official in Liberia took action and said, "You want the guy's name? I'll give you the guy's name." And so HIPAA, we got around HIPAA by virtue of the fact that the information was actually owned by another sovereign nation, and they were happy to share it with us in order to make the task easier on the public health front. But it just underscores for me a lot of the difficulties that we have. People are willing to share their information, and should they be able to do that? And then at times when there is great crisis and the greater public good would be served by making information available, we almost seem to stymie ourselves and find ourselves dependent on the good graces of an official in a foreign country. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think that's a great point. I think many people in the audience maybe don't know what 23andMe is, so would you like to expound on that? And then particularly hit the point of where they could no longer market publicly because of the law.
Well, I'm probably not qualified to comment on that because that was a corporate decision, and I'm just a mere observer on a humble little subcommittee in a backbench of the United States Congress. But 23andMe, like there were actually several companies that were out there that made retail analysis of a person's genome available to them. Is the information entirely accurate? This has been a question. And so people have, there's been some investigation as to the reproducibility and the accuracy of these results. But like anyone else, I'm always curious to find out more about myself. And this was one of those exercises I could do. And you begin to see, Dr. Zerhouni, who was the predecessor of Dr. Collins, used to talk about the 4 Ps, medicine being more predictive and preventive. And certainly genomic medicine is one of the things that delivers or begins to deliver on that promise. I would also argue that there are a lot of things that can be done on the precision side where you need to drill down on being more precise about what the issues are, but to be able to take someone clinically in a direction that might not have occurred to them in the workup of multiple sclerosis, in the workup of Alzheimer's, where the presenting symptoms sometimes can just be so nonspecific as to you find yourself on a rule-out diagnosis. Wouldn't it be great if these things were shown to be of utility that could then guide these young doctors who are sitting in the audience in 20 years' time? They would perhaps have a roadmap available to them. Hey, let's look at this first because here's your genetic makeup.
Absolutely. I think you raised a very good point. There are many, many Americans who are more than happy to spend a little money and get their genome sequenced and can afford to do it. And as the price falls, I think this is going to be much more common. Okay? Dr. Collins, you said that many times. The problem yet is we don't have all the information. And how do we get that information? Well, 23andMe, I think, had 500,000 people sign up, something in that range last time I heard. Is that right?
700,000.
700,000 now? Okay, so to me, if we sequence that information, it's got to be put in a usable form so that it's accessible by the young people who are going to take care of me when I get a little older. And they want to be able to look at that. The problem is it's going to be frozen in time. So you may be able to tell me that, you know, I've got 10 recessive mutations that I got a problem with. I'm at risk for a couple of diseases, but those 20,000 variants of unknown significance are what becomes critical. And so what we have to do is have access to that material so we can update it with additional information. This is a feedback loop. In my mind, my medical record when I get Alzheimer's has to feed back to the genetic information so they can look at my information and 1,000 other people's and say, this sequence of genetic material is important to develop Alzheimer's. There's about 10 blocks in that. Systems don't talk to each other. They don't have a discrete way to make it a decision support process. It's a discrete documentation. It's not updatable, and it's really not user-friendly at this point. And a lot of that is based on confidentiality rules in the United States. Well, you know, I'd be happy to sign mine away, all right? Because it's the benefit of my children and everybody else in the room. But somehow we can't manage that. So, you know, I pump that back to Congress, okay? Electronic health systems don't even talk to each other. How many of you have a Mac operating system at home and a Microsoft? Many people do. How many won't do that because it's hard to keep them straight? Raise your hand. How'd you like to do 4 electronic health systems which are currently in use in this city alone at major centers? 4 different operating systems. So if you're dealing with a patient, you got to look it up in your own plus 3 other spots. I mean, that, what can I say? Yeah. Fred?
Yep.
Bounce it back to you. Doctor?
So Joe commented that he was willing to provide his information. Now, Joe is an educated healthcare consumer, and he understands healthcare research, and he understands the value of that, not only to himself, but to society. One of the obstacles I think that we have as a profession, as researchers, is the understanding of the public in what the role and the value of medical research is. When we take a look, for example, at some of the pushback from parents about vaccinations, vaccines have been the most important public health benefit of the past 100 years. Every one of us, I would claim, has benefited by vaccinations. Even if we never had a vaccine, we've benefited from the public health benefit of vaccinations. And yet we have significant pushback about vaccines from some parents and families. At the same time, when as somebody who has enrolled countless patients in clinical trials, it's always a challenge because you have to explain the value of scientific research, how medical experiments are conducted to be safe and to be prudent. We've all benefited. Every one of us has benefited from the value of medical experiments that have been done, and we've learned, our predecessors in the profession have learned, we've benefited from that learning. We have all benefited personally in our own health because of that. And yet the public struggles with understanding why medical research is important. And yes, it's important to give people autonomy. That is essential. At the same time, we need to build a culture of patient engagement in medical research so that they are not opting, you know, it's not always an opt-in, but maybe more it's an opt-out, or maybe more it's a, you know, we see that strong desire from some patients, typically patients who have those severe diseases that where medical research has made a huge impact, who are just crying out to participate in studies. And I wish we had that same kind of passion to participate and be involved in research from across the public. So I think one of the challenges we have is to make medical research more understandable, to make the value of it more accessible to our patients, and to make it easier for them to participate. As we work to enroll patients in clinical trials, when we struggle with you know, differences from hospital A, hospital B, clinic C, with the informed consent, when companies have to go through hundreds of sites and go through the regulatory process in a parallel way at hundreds of sites instead of a more consistent, uniform way, that's a huge burden on being able to do things efficiently. It's a huge burden. It's a huge obstacle in getting patients engaged in medical research because it's just a lot of work. And we've gone from consent forms that are, 2 or 3 pages to 20 pages. And it's impossible for me to understand, and I'm a doctor. And I don't know how we can expect our patients to understand these very complicated things that we've made very complicated by following all the rules.
I can just weigh in on that because I think this is a really important point. In fact, this is a very interesting collection of points, all sort of gathering around this set of advances that are possible, but our own procedures are kind of getting in the way. Certainly the idea that anybody who's interested in having their complete genome sequence determined ought to be able to do so at an affordable cost is becoming a reality. Medical students here in the room, I would be surprised if by the time you graduate, the cost of a genome sequence is not well under $1,000. DNA sequencing instruments like the one I'm holding up here make this possible at a prodigiously low cost and very high accuracy. And this ought to be a real advance that we could all take advantage of. Immediately, for instance, if you had your genome sequence, the whole thing, sitting there in your medical record in a fashion that was associated with some decision support tools, and your doc is about to write a prescription, there's 120 drugs that FDA has on the label. There's information that you might want to know about this individual's DNA in order to be sure you're giving the right drug at the right dose. And that's almost not used at all because the information's not available at the time that the doc needs to write the prescription. If it's there and with a click of the mouse you can get that information, you would have, I think, a much better chance of a good outcome. And all of those terrible stories that we hear about adverse reactions to medicines, at least many of those could be reduced or eliminated. And we're not doing it because of all the complexities here of how to get the systems to work together. It will not be because of cost, at least not very soon, because the costs are going to come down. So that'll be in there. And then you'll have this issue about how do you take advantage, as Joe is saying, about the very sort of big data opportunities where if you have thousands or millions of people with this kind of information and medical information in the electronic health records, how could you use this in a way that protects privacy but allows the derivation of new knowledge that we all really need to see? I would say you probably still need to ask those people's permission, that it's sort of respect for persons to say, we would like to be able to use your electronic health record and your DNA information to make discoveries, but we're not going to reveal who you are. And that would mean that basically we ought to have an interaction every time somebody comes in for medical care about the possibility that you might be involved in a research project. How do you feel about that? Let's not make that something that's out on the margins. That ought to be right in the center of things. And then what you said about our informed consent process, which is badly broken, really needs an overhaul. There's this thing called the Common Rule, which is well designed to basically protect patient autonomy, respect for persons, opportunity to give consent. But the way we have implemented the Common Rule and the number of layers of bureaucracy and multiple IRBs that have different ideas about where the commas should go in the consent form is just gotten completely out of hand. There is in the process, and it's been in the works now for 5 years, and it's a little bit stuck, a complete revision of the Common Rule. And I hope that in some way might also feature in your legislative effort to say, it got to get unstuck. Let's make this happen. And let's make it happen in a fashion that's sensible, strips out a lot of the unnecessary words that nobody's reading anyway, allows you when you're running a multi-site trial to have a central IRB. In fact, doesn't just allow it, insists on it, so you don't have all this duplication. Gets rid of the need for extensive informed consent process for very low risk procedures, which still at the same time we're right now, they're subjected to the same kind of oversight as if you're involved in some high risk clinical research. The distinction between risks is not being made. There's a lot we could do there that would facilitate this effort, and it fits nicely into the topic we're talking about today.
Yeah. And just to build on that, with the Common Rule, as we try to make changes and make that more streamlined, well, on the FDA side, there's an added bar, too, because even the Common Rule says, look, there's some times where it doesn't make sense to get informed consent, but in the FDA, even if there's minimal risk, you need to do it. So think about, you collected this data a while ago and suddenly realize, wow, I could use it for another purpose. Well, you got to go back and consent. all these people, and yet it's going to be de-identified, it's no impact on them. That's something that we should be looking at changing, so that the FDA is in line with the common rule, and we're all approaching it the same way. And the IRB create a lot of challenges. And on the device side, I can't talk about drugs, but I can say for devices, we have also another requirement. You essentially have to go for a local IRB. And so if you have 50 clinical trial sites, you will have 50 IRBs to deal with. And then if you want to make a change, you have to go back to 50 IRBs, and that's untenable. So we think about a central IRB, at least as an option. On the device side, much like you have it today on the drug side. And I'd love to see the EHRs change so we can make those connections. We can move the data. Right now, they're all proprietary. We need to open up those interfaces so the EHR systems can communicate. I'll tell you, we had a device company. The EHR vendor gave them the administrative rights to go in, so they were able to modify it for a clinical study. And under that case, now they could go in, they actually collected the data, the little extra data they needed, part of a regular encounter, dramatically reduced costs, but only because the vendor even opened it up for the company to go ahead and make some changes. So we have to free up the data, and these systems have to talk to each other, and we have to make smart, tailored modifications as we need to do it as we go along.
I think that's a wonderful point, and I think that's going to fall to Congress. Because right now it's proprietary, and nobody's got the motivation to make the interface. Why would you shoot yourself in the foot and have somebody else have access to your electronic EHR? So that's going to be a congressional issue. I will go back for a moment and go back to what Hal said. And I think part of the issue about research is our own cultural fault, okay? I think we haven't done enough in terms of selling the importance of clinical research to our patients, to our friends, to our colleagues. Hal and I are sitting in the room as pediatricians, okay? So we have a different take on the world. In pediatric oncology, 70–80% of the patients go on a clinical trial. I worked at an organization that was 100% clinical trials, and I realized how much that contributes to new knowledge. The other thing is, many years ago, we started banking the DNA. And we bank DNA, and now it's coming out where you can use a lot of tools about what pathway is turned on and off. And it's hitting big, because this is where the future is. Just because you can't find the molecular abnormality doesn't mean the pathway is not upregulated. It doesn't mean it can't be shut off with a small molecule. And you know what? Every drug company needs that information. And right now, they can't get it. So I'll leave it up to the congressional members.
If I could extend on the point about clinical trials, is they are the most time-consuming, most costly part of the development process, and anything this committee could do to speed that up would accelerate new treatments and cures. And I agree, the EHR systems have got to be connected. They've got to be connected to the genetic information. But are there also simple interim steps we could take right now? So for example, when your doctor's doing your intake, recording your blood pressure, asking you if you wear your seatbelt, all the important things doctors do, could they also ask you if you're willing to be contacted to enroll in a clinical trial? That would avoid a step of having to go through the physician's office, and not every physician's office is set up to enroll people in clinical trials. There's also a significant amount of fear, particularly in people of lower socioeconomic status and racial minorities. What can be done to help educate people about the value of being in a clinical trial? And then another potential solution is to really leverage the growth of these accountable care organizations and the fact that we are seeing big practice consolidation. Many of these accountable care organizations aren't meeting their quality measures. Could you offer an additional incentive to enroll people in clinical trials, particularly in communities where people are hardest to reach? If you had a rural ACO or an ACO in a particular neighborhood, offered an incentive to enroll people and to share their data, that would be an important first step while we're getting the databases all connected and sharing that information and making that information available to people who really need it.
There are some efforts like that. There are a number of efforts in which patients, at least with malignancies, are contributing tumor specimens. The tumor specimens are banked. They're subsequently looked at at relapse, or even looked at initially for specific mutations or for specific pathway upregulation. And if somebody comes along with a small molecule that's going to address that, then you go back and contact the patient. But that requires a lot of explanation, a lot of detail. a lot of work that right now the average physician is not set to do, is not supported to do, doesn't have the infrastructure to achieve. So hopefully we'll get there with the electronic records a little faster than I hope, I guess.
I'm also very interested in translational and clinical research. But I think one of the geniuses and the brilliance of the National Institutes of Health is that for many years they supported basic fundamental research in yeast, worms, flies, anything that moved. And I think at the moment we're all so caught up in this idea that we should be focusing on the clinical arena that we forget that we still have a lot to learn. We actually don't know everything. Until quite recently, we used to call a lot of what Dr. Collins sequenced as junk. Sorry, but it's true. We called it junk. Well, guess what? It ain't junk. It's got a lot of that junk is actually used in our cells in ways that we don't know. And so I think it's important. Everybody at this, not everybody, many of the people at this table are companies, and that their job is not to create that basic knowledge. That's the job of the federal government, I believe. And we should never lose, that, that very important point. It's not all translation, it's not all in the clinic, but figuring out how a yeast cell knows how to grow and how to die and how to, do all the things it does, other than make great beer here in Michigan, is critical.
I might offer a friendly amendment. Peter has stated that it's not all translational. I might frame it that, in fact, if you look at scientific research, and this is my perspective, I think it should all be translational. I spent a lot of my career as a molecular virologist and participated, for example, in discovering the first gene of a herpes virus that was involved in the switch from latency to active replication. Maybe not this year, maybe not this decade, but someday that's going to be translational into how we understand herpes viruses and how we can develop a vaccine and how we can control replication. So I would say that translation is actually across the board, and that information that may not be seen as being translational is the foundation of what will be seen by a broader group as translational. So, we're kind of coasting if we only focus on the end of the translational spectrum, and we don't pay attention to those basic principles earlier in that research spectrum.
Yeah. And my point is though that I think it would be not a good idea to ask companies to do that kind of work, because they're closer to the cutting edge of implication. But what the government can do that the companies cannot do is fund research which we don't know where it's going to go yet. That was my main point.
And to really have a base of individuals in those clinical trials. As we've sat down, an active participant in these roundtables has been a former colleague, Jim Greenwood from Pennsylvania. He was on the health subcommittee as well. He now represents Bio, and that is his big thrust. He's talked about only the government could provide these studies or help provide the framework to establish the clinical trials in volumes that really make sense, that you could look at in blocks of 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds and 40-year-olds, so you can find out what that sequence is when you get Alzheimer's, and look back and probably, like everyone in this room, if any of us could help solve a disease, bingo, sign us up, right?
Listening to Dr. Jones and Dr. Jensen, a thought flashed into my head, and it's a concept I think we need to put on the table, and that's the physician scientist. Okay? It hasn't come up in the roundtable today, but I think basic science is critically important, having spent some of my career in it. Clinical science is critically important, and delivering it to the patient at the end. And I think the people in a unique position to do that are clinical scientists. And I'm afraid they're becoming extinct, all right? We don't have a program really to fund their career development. We don't have a lot of programs that are going to get them through their postdoc, find them that first position, get them in the right milieu. And so the physician scientists, there's a lot less physician scientists coming out because they're not going to be funded. You're going to fund the PhD who's doing excellent basic research. The physician is going to be pressured to clinical work. And somehow we have to retain this species if we really want to do good translational. Actually, if we want to do good basic science, because the questions have to be brought to the lab.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that, and I'm also quite alarmed by the trends that one can see. My advisory committee, which is constituted of sort of senior leaders in biomedical research, was asked to look at this question and delivered their report just 2 months ago. Actually, the group was chaired by David Ginsburg, who's a professor at the University of Michigan, a Howard Hughes investigator, remarkably successful, well-qualified physician scientist. And when you look at the statistics of what's happening over the course of years in terms of who is turning out to be in this workforce of physician scientists, by which I mean physicians who are spending at least half their time in research, because that's often the kind of person that we most desperately need to get really seriously engaged in this effort. It is dropping really quite seriously. And as a result, if you look at the aging of the physician scientist workforce, we're starting to look pretty gray. And this is not what we need at this time where all this opportunity for translation and clinical applications are coming along. And you've mentioned many of the factors that have played into this. Certainly the concern, which I guess Peter referred to very graphically as naked fear about whether there is support for this, is playing a big role, as well as the costs of medical education and the difficulty in being able to be as able to pay those back if you go into research, and the long follow-up time for training. We are going to institute a few things to try to help with this in terms of identifying paths for physicians who are interested in research to be able to do so with maybe less financial and long-term costs to them. But the real solution has to be a belief that there is a career path there that's going to be satisfying, that's going to allow people to pursue the vision, the dreams that they have developed in the course of this sort of self-realization that this is something that people want to do. That's not going to be easy to get turned around in the current climate. One more reason why we really have to focus on that. One thing that we will continue to do is to support the MD PhD training programs, which train people for both degrees. When you look at the retrospective there, those that have been trained in those programs have generally done quite well in the grant application process. Their success in obtaining support is good. It is disturbing, though, when you look at sort of over the course of time, the number of MD PhDs that have basically stepped out of research and into full-time practice is going up. And again, I think that's a reflection of the stresses on the system. And that's a terrible waste of talent, of resources that has been put into training to become a research scientist, and then basically ends up in a full-time clinical position, which is a great thing to do, but that's not really what the investment was all about.
I don't know if we could shift gears for just a second, but I think I wanted to come back to the point, I think, Fred, that you had made a little while back in terms of the sort of the reduction in the availability or the number of venture capitalists, for example, broadly or more generally, but also and then the corresponding reduction in capital. And I think there's, you know, thinking about steps that can be done in a piece of legislation in relatively short order to have an immediate impact. I mean, there are two examples where the regulatory environment and or lack of biomarkers acceptable as surrogate endpoints for disease have immediate, for a small company like us, but we're one of any number of examples I'm sure this is true for, are immediate roadblocks to being able to access the capital to develop that compound. So one example is in the area of and Dr. Collins, we talked a little bit about this at dinner last night, in the area of polycystic kidney disease. And so right now, GFR is kind of the standard that everybody uses to, and this is a genetic disease that affects about 600,000 people in the United States. It's GFR is the primary clinical endpoint, except that happens when you can start to really see the decline. That's pretty much at the end of when a drug could be useful. As an alternative to that, monitoring a biomarker change in total kidney volume has a high degree of correlation with the eventual worsening of kidney function. And so I know there are some initiatives underway to identify these kinds of biomarkers that can now shift the treatment paradigm so that you can now actually identify patients earlier at a younger age before that particular disease progresses to the point where the therapies that might be usable could even be evaluated. And right now there are no treatments for this particular indication. So there's a movement underway now with the Polycystic Kidney Disease Outcomes Consortium working with FDA. They've had to qualify this TKV, or total kidney volume, as a surrogate marker that would predict disease progression. So very clear, concrete, near-term way to do that. But for us as a company, until that happens, you can't actually get venture capitalists to take the risk that your product might be approvable based on that surrogate endpoint rather than the current standard of care. And you can't get pharmaceutical companies to partner with you because of the regulatory pathway uncertainty and the acceptance of that as an approvable endpoint. And so there's a really simple in concept. The data's got to be there, and actually the data's now being accumulated. But that's a relatively rapid process that could take place given the amount of data that's accumulated. It's being looked at now. If you could qualify that as an endpoint, all of a sudden now you have, and there are almost no treatments even in development for that condition, and yet it affects a pretty significant number of people, not just in the United States but around the world. The other area, direct correlation to the ability to finance product development and get new treatments for patients is in the diabetes area. There have been no new insulin sensitizers approved for diabetes since 1999, and yet in fact that's what I'm pretty sure every physician treating a patient with diabetes wished that they had, was an effective insulin sensitizer that didn't have some of the side effects that have been associated with the previously approved compounds. And so in response to those safety issues that I think were legitimate to definitely look at, there was almost an overreaction putting in place a requirement for cardiovascular outcome trials that have now taken the number of patients required to go through phase 3 programs from maybe 2,000 to 15,000 patients at about 60,000 or more per patient. So now you have, instead of $100 million drug cost to registration, it's $500, $600, $700 million. And now a small company, first of all, you even see the large companies can't afford $500 million very easily, so you can maybe do one of those. And it doesn't matter what type of drug you're developing for diabetes, you have to go through the same test. But you also can now no longer find a group of investors that could put a syndicate together that could raise $500 million if they had to take that all the way to market. And so now you have almost nobody working on insulin sensitizers, which are the only compounds that actually treat the root causes of the disease and have been shown to be effective over the years despite some of the issues that have been associated. So there again, and you don't have, it's not an either or, right? It's not like we don't have any cardiovascular outcome trials, but if you can shift the balance of that to some of that being pre and some of that being post-marketing, assuming that the safety data warrants, you now can have that added expense taken care of by profits from the product instead of as a barrier to ever getting the product approved for patients' use. And again, simple in concept, difficult in practice, but very clear and very tangible steps that could be taken in a piece of legislation that would actually improve the availability of products to patients, which right now they're going without. And that, I think that could be fixed.
Great, thank you.
One of the offsets, I hope, I beg your pardon. But one of the offsets that I hope we'll look at as we develop the legislation, as we know, money's always a problem. Like Margaret Thatcher said, we have run out of other people's money, so we have to be better with what we've got left. And one of the things that I really have pushed this Congress, and I will continue to push next Congress, is we've got to somehow decouple the CBO's 10-year budgetary scoring window. You talked about Lipitor and prevention of heart disease. And with Medicare Part D, I think we're just on the cusp of beginning to understand how if you paid for the Lipitor for 10 years, you're probably going to buy fewer hospitalizations for CHF in the next 10 years. And how do we capture those dollars that are not spent in the next 10 years in the costing or the calculation that is made as to what will this bill cost when you bring it to CBO to be scored? We have to have some flexibility. I know the budget guys don't like this, but we've got to have some flexibility in the window of scoring on these things, because even the insulin sensitivity issue, great, CMS will look at that and say, okay, a new drug, it's going to cost this much over the next 10 years. But if it's really good and it's really successful, you're buying a lot fewer amputations, a lot fewer eye procedures, a lot fewer hospitalizations in the next 10 years.
Dr. Burgess, you said it perfectly. You got to get the central budget office to figure out quality of life and what difference that makes to the patients you've helped, because that's really the issue. Walking around as an amputee is fairly difficult, and that changes the whole quality of life. And that's something somehow we have to get across to the Congress. We have to get across to the physicians. We have to get across to the public that, in fact, research, okay, doesn't necessarily translate into a new drug or dollars and cents. It translates into better quality of life, longer life, more productive life for American citizens. And maybe they'll jump on the bandwagon.
Now, that'd be a real world solution, but we live in the world of the CBO. And so if you're correct about your estimation of total kidney volume and how you preserve function for a medicine for the first 10 years, that preservation of function, I mean, it becomes no question about it. If someone has to go through dialysis and a transplant, that's a big problem for them in their lives. But just the dollars and cents side is, if we can get CBO to begin to give us credit on that, then perhaps we can overcome some of the offset issues that we're going to face, because there will be significant.
I absolutely agree on the point about the CBO, and we need to see that same kind of long-sighted thinking in the way healthcare is delivered and insurance benefits are designed. And I think too often we're seeing now insurance benefits that limit access to the sick, whether it's through narrow networks of physicians, the use of specialty tiers that put every medicine for rheumatoid arthritis, cancer, HIV out of the reach of patient. Insurance designs ought to encourage patients and their physicians to make the right decisions using clinical evidence, using data connected across sites of care, and considering over a time window that's not just 1 year. Because you're right, the benefits of treatment now pay off over 10, 15 years, and we're not going to get to that 10, 15 years if we see people not even being able to access. If we did everything we could to fix the discovery and the development phase and didn't fix the delivery phase, all that effort wouldn't really make a difference.
Well, I want to thank everyone for participating. If anyone wants to make a last comment, we'd appreciate that. But I think we've had a great discussion. We certainly have a big charge ahead of us. And I just want to tell you from the bottom of our hearts, Mike and I are going to work very hard to get this thing done. And for everybody here in the room, and your thoughts and expertise. And I want to remind folks that they can weigh in with us formally at cures@mail.house.gov, cures@mail.house.gov. And we look forward to continue to take comments, and we're going to be working with the CBO. That's a very good point. Sitting down with them a lot in the next number of months as we put together this bill. And I do say that if we do what we think we can do, we're going to see some pretty significant savings on the health side and a much better quality of life for Americans across the board. So does anyone want to make Peter, do you want any closing comments that people want to make before we adjourn for the morning?
No, I just want to thank you on behalf of all of us for taking this time and effort. And I think we're all behind you. Let's hope you can get it there in a good form. So I want to thank you very, very much.
Anybody else? Anybody? Yeah.
I think it was Mary Lasker who said, if you think research is expensive, try disease. And what we're doing here this morning, and again, many thanks to you, Fred, and other parts of this really important process, is trying to remind people that we could actually knock out a lot of disease if we could unleash the research enterprises that are so ready for this kind of application. and especially in this country, the stakes are really high, both in terms of individual lives, their families, our economy, our potential of remaining in a leadership role, which will be good for us in the long term. And it's going to take every bit of the energy that you're bringing to this to make sure we don't miss that chance. So again, many thanks from all of us for the leadership you've shown in bringing us together for yet another very interesting conversation. And it's going to be fascinating to see how you turn this into a piece of legislation.
You know, I'm gonna knowing I know what your schedule is, and you need to get to the other side of the state to catch a plane. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your dinner tonight? What you're gonna do?
Well, I'm on the way to Seattle to be part of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation Grand Challenges meeting, which actually started yesterday and goes through tomorrow evening. That includes the opportunity to bring even more closely together the efforts that we are pursuing in global health research with what the Gates Foundation is doing, because between NIH and Gates, that's more than half of the effort that's currently going into global research. As you can imagine, a big topic tomorrow in the panel that I have with Bill is going to be about Ebola. And here's a great example of where the investments in research are probably now the best hope that we have of trying to make sure that this terrible outbreak in West Africa does not happen again in this fashion. We have a vaccine that's already gone into volunteers in a phase 1 trial, so far looking reasonably good. We hope to be able to mount a phase 2 trial in West Africa in a few months of that vaccine. We have about 5 different therapeutics that all look good in animal models but haven't yet been in human clinical trials. If we just had one more year to get ready for this, we would have been in pretty good shape. Nobody knew 2014 was going to be the one. And that's a testimony to the fact that the federal government, through the Congress's decision-making about support and undergirded by what the taxpayers believe in, have been working on this problem with the assumption that sooner or later this was going to be a really significant global issue. So we'll be talking about that. We'll be talking about tuberculosis, which is a scourge all over the place. We'll be talking about malaria and HIV and all those non-communicable diseases that are now emerging in the developing world. Sort of what we think of as Western diseases aren't so Western when you think about what's happening with hypertension, diabetes, cancer, obesity, and many other parts of the world. And we'll be talking about maternal and child health and trying to see what we could collectively do on those things. All of those will be part of the agenda. They should be. We no longer can think of global as being the opposite of domestic, or domestic as the opposite of global. If Ebola hasn't taught us that, I don't know what will.
Thank you.